8-year-old black boy stuns judge with his legal knowledge, shocking the entire jury. The silence in the Elmview courtroom was broken when Elijah Brooks, just 8 years old, stood up from his chair and asked permission to speak. The boy held a makeshift folder full of papers and notes, his determined eyes contrasting with his small size in front of the massive court. "Your Honor, I would like to make a statement in defense of my grandmother," said the boy in a firm voice that echoed through the silent room. Judge Milton Gray stopped writing and looked up over his glasses. In his 30-year career he had never seen anything like this. At the jury table, some members looked at each other with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Gloria Brooks, 72, was accused of misappropriating funds from the Maple Creek Neighborhood Housing Program. The amount was significant, $175,000, which had simply vanished from the coffers of the community group she had run for 15 years. "Young man, you should be in school," the judge said with a forced half-smile, trying to be kind in this unusual situation. "I know, sir, but my grandma has heart problems and she can't get upset," Elijah answered. "Her lawyer dropped the case yesterday because he found out he wouldn't get paid." His voice echoed with a maturity unsettling for someone so young. A quiet stir ran through the courtroom. Mr. Reeves, the prosecutor, rolled his eyes in irritation. He was a stylish man in his 50s, known for his 95% conviction rate in financial crime cases. "Your Honor, this is completely irregular. A child cannot represent anyone in court," Reeves protested, adjusting his expensive tie with barely hidden disdain. "I don't want to represent anyone, sir," Elijah said, turning to the prosecutor with impressive politeness. "I just want to tell the truth. My grandma taught me that the truth always wins, even when it seems impossible." Judge Gray leaned forward, intrigued. There was something in the boy's courage that deeply moved him. But there was also a quiet tension in the room, the image of a black child standing alone in a system that had rarely been kind to people like him. "Elijah, you may speak for 5 minutes, but only as a witness," the judge ruled, ignoring Reeves' silent objection. Elijah took a deep breath and opened his folder. The papers were organized so neatly it caught everyone's attention. There were newspaper clippings, photocopies of official forms, and even simple diagrams drawn by Elijah himself to explain key points. "Your Honor, I've lived with my grandma since my parents died in a car accident 2 years ago. She's always been the one managing the housing program, and every Sunday night, I helped her go through the bills at the kitchen table." Reeves looked ready to object again, but something about Elijah's eyes made him pause. This kid knew what he was doing. "Every Sunday Grandma Gloria would spread all the documents on the table and let me sort the receipts by color. Blue for expenses, yellow for income. It was our special time," Elijah said, his voice shaking a little before he caught himself. Everyone in the courtroom watched. Some with amusement, some with skepticism, but Elijah stood tall. His eyes showed something deeper than just a boy trying to help his grandmother. They showed the calm of someone who had survived storms most couldn't imagine. "Your Honor," Elijah continued, "this story isn't just about bills. 3 weeks before the money went missing, Grandma Gloria noticed that someone had been messing with the housing account. She didn't have permission to make any of those changes." He held up a simple notebook with a worn blue cover. "She wrote everything in here." Reeves suddenly stood up. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. We are wasting valuable time on a child's fantasies," clearly coached by the defendant. "Mr. Reeves, you'll have your chance to respond," Judge Gray said calmly. "My grandma always told me to let people finish speaking," Elijah said politely, turning to the prosecutor. There was a murmur in the courtroom. The truth was more complicated than anyone had guessed. Gloria Brooks had spent 15 years running the Maple Creek housing program without ever taking a salary. She did it because she believed every child deserved a home. 2 years ago, when Elijah lost his parents in a car crash, she had taken him in without hesitation. The boy arrived traumatized. They were coming back from his school play when a drunk driver slammed into their car. For months, Elijah didn't speak. Gloria spent countless nights beside his bed, reading him stories, not fairy tales but court cases. Legal documents. Forms. The same ones she helped neighbors with in her volunteer work. "My little man," she used to say, "knowledge is the one thing they can't take from us. When you understand how the world works, you don't feel small anymore." And slowly, Elijah began asking questions. He remembered legal terms. He understood forms. And Gloria realized he had a gift for understanding logic, arguments, and systems, things even trained lawyers struggled with. "Your Honor," Elijah now said, "may I show you what we found?" Judge Gray nodded. Reeves scoffed loudly. "This is a circus," he muttered. A child pretending to understand financial fraud. Elijah looked directly at him. A lot more than you think, sir. I started reading legal documents at 6 years old. It was the only way I could connect with my grandmother. The room fell into an awkward silence. Even Reeves looked briefly thrown off. Elijah stepped up to the bench with surprising confidence. Look. On September 12, $2,500 was taken out for emergency roof repairs at the community center. But Grandma took me there the next day. He held up an old, pixelated photo. This was taken on September 13th. As you can see, the roof was perfect. No repairs were done. Reeves shifted uncomfortably. His whole case was built on Gloria's role as program administrator. But he hadn't looked into the transactions individually. Then, on September 18th, Elijah went on, $1,800 was withdrawn for security equipment. But no new security equipment ever appeared. The jury was now paying close attention. Several leaned forward. And on September 25th, Elijah said, a withdrawal of $3,200 for outside legal counsel. He paused, letting the words hang. But Grandma never hired outside lawyers. She always got help from friends who volunteered. There were whispers in the gallery. Mr. Reeves, Elijah said, turning to the prosecutor, did you check if these companies that were paid actually exist? Reeves hesitated. It was such a basic question. But no, he hadn't. His focus had been on blaming Gloria, not verifying the payees. The investigation focused on her role as administrator, Reeves said defensively. I see, Elijah replied, his tone calm but sharp. So, you just assumed Grandma was guilty and didn't check who really took the money? Another hush swept the room. Every question Elijah asked exposed cracks in the prosecutor's case. What Reeves didn't realize was that Elijah had spent weeks carefully preparing, not out of childish curiosity, but with the strategic mind of someone who knew the odds were stacked against him. What they all saw now wasn't luck or cute innocence. It was calculated effort. There's something strange about these transactions, Elijah continued, pulling another envelope from his folder. They were all signed by Grandma Gloria. But she didn't sign a single one. He held up several papers side by side. I learned about handwriting analysis at the Elmview Public Library. Even a kid like me can tell these signatures are different. He pointed. This is Grandma's real signature, soft, curved lines. And these others? Heavy pressure, totally different angles. Reeves rolled his eyes. Now we're accepting handwriting analysis from a child? He scoffed. This is ridiculous. Dr. Reeves, Elijah said with polite firmness, do you have a professional handwriting analyst to prove the signatures are real? Reeves didn't answer. He hadn't thought it necessary. It was another basic check he'd skipped. So you have no proof Grandma Gloria signed these documents? Elijah asked. Reeves clenched his jaw. The courtroom was silent again. Elijah's voice remained steady. For the last 2 months I've been studying every detail of this case. But I wasn't alone. He turned and smiled toward the back of the room. A retired librarian helped me. Her name is Miss Helen. She used to work in law firms. When I came into the library looking for books on court procedure, she said something to me. Elijah paused, then repeated her words. You have a legal mind. But courtrooms are war zones and they'll try to dismiss you because you're a child. So you need to be 3 steps ahead. Together they built a plan. Ms. Helen taught him how to organize evidence. How to ask questions that expose weak points. How to stay calm when adults try to shake you. But the biggest thing we found is this, Elijah said, pulling out a document sealed in plastic. It's a report from the bank. He held it up. On the same day the money disappeared, someone called the account at 2:30 p.m. The call lasted 15 minutes. He pulled out another page. This is a medical record from Elmview General Hospital. At exactly 2:30 p.m., Grandma Gloria was with me. I had an asthma attack. She stayed with me from 1 to 5 p.m. A loud murmur rolled across the courtroom. This was the first concrete, provable evidence that Gloria couldn't have moved the money. Reeves stood up, rattled. Your Honor, these documents were never presented during discovery. Dr. Reeves, Elijah interrupted. Did you present any documents proving Grandma was even present when the money was taken? Silence. Reeves had nothing. No timestamps. No video. No proof. Elijah didn't stop. Did you check the building's security cameras, sir? Reeves was sweating now. They weren't working that day, he muttered. Really? Elijah tilted his head, pretending to be curious. Because I called the security company last week. They said the cameras were working perfectly. They even offered me the recordings. For free. Gasps filled the room. The people watching were no longer just entertained, they were stunned. The child had done real investigation. He had found evidence even the state hadn't asked for. How did you get all this? Reeves demanded, his voice a mix of panic and disbelief. It's simple, Elijah said softly. When you love someone you do what it takes to protect them. I've been studying this case every day after school. At that moment, Gloria, who had sat silently behind him the entire time, wiped tears from her face. Judge Gray leaned forward. Elijah, he said with emotion in his voice, how did you learn to present evidence like this? Miss Helen helped me. She said everyone deserves a defense, even if they can't afford it. Reeves looked like he was unraveling. This wasn't just a desperate boy trying to save his grandma. This was a strategic duo who had put together a better case than the entire prosecution. But I have one last piece of evidence, Elijah said, his voice going quiet and serious. The most important one. He reached into his case and pulled out a sealed envelope. This, he said, proves who actually stole the money. Inside the sealed envelope, Elijah held the final piece. Before I open this, he said looking directly at Reeves, I'd like to ask you something, Dr. Reeves. Reeves shifted in his seat, his face pale and lips drawn tight. Would you like to withdraw the charges against my grandmother before I show this to the court? There was a long pause. All eyes were on Reeves. He looked down. Sweat formed on his forehead. I can't drop charges based on a child's threats, he said, voice cracking. Elijah gave a calm nod and opened the envelope. Inside was a small audio recorder and a printed transcript. Dr. Reeves, Elijah said, do you remember a phone call you made on September 15th? He pressed play. The courtroom filled with the unmistakable voice of Reeves. Tony, I need this case with the old woman wrapped up fast. It doesn't matter if she's guilty or not. I need a win before the Attorney General's election. Gasps echoed through the room. Another voice on the tape replied nervously. Rick, what if someone finds out we didn't investigate right? Reeves' voice again. Who's going to find out? It's a poor old black woman. The jury's already decided before they even sit down. Silence. Complete heart-pounding silence. Several jurors looked down embarrassed. One wiped her eyes. Reeves stood up, panicked. This is inadmissible. That recording was obtained illegally. No, sir, Elijah said, still calm. Ms. Helen taught me about recording laws. This call was made on a public office phone, and there are signs in that building that all calls may be recorded for transparency. Judge Gray looked stunned. Is that true? He asked. Elijah nodded and held up a photo of the sign from the office wall. Reeves' mouth opened but no sound came out. And there's more, Elijah said, pulling out another document. This is a message you sent to Tony 3 days after the call. It says, and I quote, don't waste time checking companies or signatures. Case needs to close in 2 weeks. Focus only on the administrator. He handed the printout to the judge. Gasps turned into audible outrage. The jury exchanged disgusted looks. One man muttered, unbelievable. This, Elijah said, wasn't carelessness. It was corruption. He wasn't finished. And this, he added, holding up a final page, is your personal bank statement. The judge raised an eyebrow. 3 days after Grandma was charged, you received $25,000 from a shell company. The same company that received some of the housing program's payments. Reeves turned a ghastly shade of white. That's not, he stammered. Elijah didn't let him finish. You weren't just lazy with the investigation, Dr. Reeves. You were part of it. The courtroom exploded with murmurs. One woman in the gallery said aloud, he set her up. Ms. Helen told me something important, Elijah said, turning back to Reeves. She said people like you always make the same mistake. You think you can crush those who seem weaker, without consequences. Gloria, silent until now, stood up slowly. Dr. Reeves, she said, her voice steady and clear, I have spent 15 years helping families find homes. You tried to destroy all of that, for money, for power. But you failed. Reeves lowered his head. The fight was gone from his face. Judge Gray took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice shook slightly. Elijah, he said, in my 30 years on this bench, I have never seen a more thorough presentation of evidence. Not from a lawyer. Not from an adult. And certainly not from a child. Thank you, Your Honor, Elijah said quietly. I just wanted to clear my grandma's name and make sure justice was done. The judge turned to Reeves. Mr. Reeves, the charges against Gloria Brooks are dismissed. and I am referring this case to the state for a full investigation into prosecutorial misconduct and corruption." Reeves tried to object but stumbled, barely staying upright. His arrogance had turned into pure panic. "Your Honor," Elijah said gently, "I want everyone to know, I didn't do this for revenge. I did it because I love my Grandma Gloria. And because every child deserves to believe that justice is possible, even when everything says it's not." There was a pause. Then the courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause. Several jurors stood to clap, some with tears in their eyes, not just for Gloria's innocence, but for the extraordinary courage, intelligence, and grace an 8-year-old boy had shown in the face of power. Reeves, now visibly shaken, was quietly escorted out by security. His career was over. But a new story was just beginning. 6 months after the trial that changed Elmview, Elijah sat in the front row of the city's law school, not as a student but as a guest speaker. At age 9 he had become the most studied civil procedure case of the decade. True justice, Elijah told an audience of over 300 future lawyers, isn't about defeating someone. It's about protecting those you love. And teaching others how to do the same. In the front row Gloria smiled. Her health had improved dramatically since the stress had lifted. The Maple Creek housing program was thriving again, now under transparent leadership, and receiving record donations from across the country, thanks to the story of Elijah and his grandmother. Reeves, meanwhile, faced a much darker outcome. After a federal investigation, he was convicted of corruption, misconduct, and fraud. He lost his law license, served 2 years in prison, and now worked quietly as an insurance clerk in a small town, unknown and forgotten. People sometimes asked Elijah if he felt sorry for him. "I do," Elijah answered during a later lecture. Not for what happened to him, but because he had power, and used it to hurt people. Miss Helen, now officially Elijah's mentor through a university-sponsored program, sat in the audience during that talk, beaming with pride. Together, she and Elijah had created the Elijah Project, a program teaching kids in underprivileged communities their basic legal rights. By that time, the project had expanded to 25 public schools across Elmview, reaching hundreds of students who now believed in their voice and value. "Elijah taught us something fundamental," the law school dean said during a presentation. "That knowledge without character is dangerous. But character with knowledge? That can change the world." 3 prestigious law firms had already pledged to sponsor Elijah's full college education when the time came. National media continued to follow his story, but Gloria remained fiercely protective, insisting Elijah still live a normal life with cartoons on Sundays, basketball at school, and chores just like any other kid. Meanwhile, the impact of their trial reached far beyond the news. Inspired by the courtroom revelations, state lawmakers passed a bill called the Elijah Law. It required prosecutors in fraud cases to provide physical evidence placing the accused at the scene, preventing baseless charges based on assumption or prejudice. Other states soon began drafting similar laws. And Gloria? She was now known as Elmview's Citizen of the Year. She used her platform to push for reform in welfare and housing programs and had been invited to join the City Council's committee overseeing public funding. "My grandson taught me something I'll never forget," she said during an interview. "That our age doesn't define our wisdom. And our color doesn't limit our ability. Sometimes, justice just needs to be reminded of its own values." Back in the same courtroom where everything happened, Judge Gray had a framed photo sitting on his desk. It showed the moment Elijah stood at the bench, folder in hand, eyes focused, fearless. He kept it there as a reminder. True justice, the judge often said to new clerks, can come from the most unexpected places. From that day forward, he became known for scrutinizing every case with far more rigor, often citing the Brooks case as a benchmark of due process. And Elijah? He was still a kid. He got into trouble at school sometimes. He forgot to do chores. He loved peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. He laughed at silly cartoons. He played basketball with his friends. But he also carried something unusual for a boy his age, a quiet wisdom and a deep belief in fairness that even adults found inspiring. The Maple Creek community, once battered by scandal, had become a model across the country. The housing program flourished under new oversight, and Gloria was invited to consult in other cities. Elijah often went with her, always with that same, carefully organized binder now famous in law schools and bar associations across the country. During one of those trips, a reporter asked him, "Elijah, what's the biggest thing you learned from all this?" He paused, thoughtful. "I learned that when you're right, and you don't give up, the system can be fair. But only if you're ready to prove it." Miss Helen, watching from the side, wiped a tear. Later she would say, That boy didn't just save his grandmother. He restored my faith that the next generation might fix what ours couldn't. The Elijah case set a legal precedent. Lawyers across the country began citing it in arguments about prosecutorial misconduct and evidentiary standards. Law schools added it to their ethics curriculum. Children in public schools were taught their rights using materials from the Elijah Project. He had changed the law. He had changed lives. But when people asked Elijah what made the difference, he always gave the same answer. The difference between being a victim and being a winner isn't what happens to you. It's what you decide to do next. And when they asked about his secret, he smiled. Grandma Gloria taught me that knowledge is power. But love? Love is courage. Dr. Reeves had tried to destroy a family, but ended up destroying only himself. Elijah and Gloria, meanwhile, emerged stronger, inspiring thousands of children to believe that their voices matter. Their story proved something powerful. That age does not define ability. That color does not limit potential. And that when love and knowledge work together, miracles can happen. Even in the most unlikely places. Even in a courtroom. Even in the heart of an 8-year-old boy with a folder full of truth. If this story of justice and overcoming adversity touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We bring you true stories that prove something simple but powerful. The best revenge is not destroying those who hurt you. It's building something so great they can never imagine. And now it's your turn. Have you ever had to fight for someone you love, against a system that felt impossible to beat? Leave your story of determination in the comments. Because as Elijah Brooks taught us, every child and every adult has more power than they realize, when they decide justice is worth fighting for. Sometimes revolutions don't begin with protests or shouting. Sometimes they begin with a child, a folder, and the unshakable belief that truth and love always win.